Hello, everybody. I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to our Wonkette Easter Spectacular. Joining me today is Robin Panakia and Jamie Lynn uh, Crofts, who's going to help us go through the legal craziness that we've been seeing with the originally coming on to talk to us about abortion laws and where we were going with that. But I felt like we've had a fascinating week in elections where it really does what I call a sort of backlash to Dobbs. And um, to jump right into it, while my wife is still listening, because I think I've probably already gone too far and lost her. But let's start with Wisconsin, Jamie.
We did it. Yes, it really is amazing. But this race in Wisconsin, abortion was one of the biggest issues in this race, if not the biggest issue in this race. And I think that the margin shows how Wisconsin voters feel about our current pre-Civil War abortion ban. It was funny after November, I heard people in Wisconsin calling Evers when he won re-election in the governor's office a Wisconsin landslide. He won by like 2 points. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that Judge Janet won by, I think, more than 10 points at the end of the day really says a lot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, it's a very, very clear mandate.
Go ahead.
And there was how she campaigned. She sort of didn't try. I've seen it wasn't necessarily about I am not a political actor. I don't actually believe in anything. That type of sort of I'm a robed objectivist. It was more very clearly your abortion rights and an actual stable democracy. Mm-hmm. And it was very clear there were articles about specifically amongst the young people who came out in massive numbers, and it was very clear the campaign abortion rights and unfucking the gerrymanders, and that was sort of a very clear message. Sometimes Democrats can have trouble. I mean, this constantly comes up where there's a sense of maybe we need to run away from abortion, even other quote unquote culture war issues. And time and again, it's like, no, you're going to win on specifically now abortion, and basically free elections are going to get people out. Is that what you think you saw sort of occurring, Jamie? For those who don't know, you are in Wisconsin.
Yes, I am. And yeah, that's absolutely what I saw. I mean, abortion, and also, the fact that Wisconsin has the most fucked up political maps in the country are huge motivating factors for people and really helped get out the vote that we needed to. I mean, this is an April odd year election. Those are historically very low turnout. And we broke the record this year for turnout in one of these elections that didn't. Occasionally it coincides with the presidential primary, and those obviously have higher turnout. This was the highest turnout ever in a year that didn't have a presidential primary attached to it. I mean, that shows how much voters care about what's going on here. And in this state right now, Wisconsin, it's just so crazy. Wisconsin is a very purple state. It's such a purple state. And for this to happen, it really couldn't have said more where voters are right now. And this isn't just Wisconsin. It's what we've seen everywhere since Dobbs. I mean, November went far better than anyone had thought that it was going to. And every time abortion has been on the ballot, abortion rights have won, whether it was codifying abortion rights or striking down a constitutional amendment to ban abortion.
Because people don't actually want to ban abortion. And Republicans here and there, the more calculating of them, are starting to realize this. And they're going, wait, no, stop with the ban. Maybe try 15 weeks.
I was loving that on Twitter, the people who were like, okay, guys, everyone thinks Republicans want to completely ban abortion. We need to counter that messaging. And I'm like, I wonder why people would possibly think that.
The one that I saw, the person actually said, we need to say that we're not the ones wanting these extreme laws at all. And it's the Democrats who are trying to push for due date abortions, which is not a thing. Like, physically not even possible, I'm going to say.
Yeah, but that was much easier before there was a reality of what Republicans actually did and Republicans are actually doing. Robin, you've written about this for a long time, of where people like Roberts and the sort of the idea of the stealth abortion bans, where you don't just actually do it, you just essentially make it so very, very difficult, which is the case pre-Roe, that most people can't access abortion care.
Yeah, and that's really what was going on in a lot of states where they only had 3 abortion clinics. And people had to, wait for 3 days and have all these, things set before they could have an abortion. For a lot of people, abortion access was not a reality.
And so what happened was
many years.
Yeah, and it seemed as if their thought was that this will occur, nothing really will change. And I think for a lot of people, it's like, okay, well, I think Ann Coulter of all people was like, okay, well, we did it. It's no longer a constitutional right. What the hell are you doing? Pushing these laws, trying to criminalize, anyone who gets an abortion or tries to access, going after the pill. It was essentially really going. I never believed the whole idea of that Republicans don't really want to ban or really want to overturn Roe. No, they really do.
Well, that was always bullshit.
They really do. It was just that this would happen, and then, okay, well, no big news, because that's one of the reasons I'd wanted to speak with Jamie, because Rob and I had talked about this. Democrats haven't actually done a lot of movement on protecting abortion rights after Roe fell. There was no sense of kind of urgency there. There's been some speeches that vice president had given, but essentially that was going to be it. But it was just this tremendous overreach when you're getting these sort of Civil War era bans, laws about abortion based on science, written at a time when the Marx Brothers movies were making movies, just seems very weird. And that was just making such a case, making it such an issue beyond.
Crack down on wandering wombs.
Yes, not letting people leave the state to have an abortion against any sort of. Jamie, as a lawyer, you'd seen that, what? It was insane, right? Like that, you can't restrict someone's travel for any reason.
Yeah, there's this whole thing called the Dormant Commerce Clause, and we just don't have it anymore. We can restrict people from, interstate travel used to be a fundamental right, but I guess if you're a pregnant person, you don't have that same fundamental right. I mean, there's so much about it. Like, to uphold, what was it, SB 8? Is that what the Texas bounty, the bounty hunter law? I mean, you have to absolutely twist yourself up into a knot to make any sort of legal justification to uphold that. And so, even though, the three of us and a lot, people who have been in this space for a long time knew as soon as the Supreme Court granted certain Dobbs that this was what they were going to do, but they made it even more clear when the emergency SB 8 litigation went up, and they didn't even stay it while they heard further arguments. Just like, no, this is fine.
Let's just let that slide for now. It's all gonna be okay.
Abortion bounty hunters are great. And I haven't actually checked. There was, that fun case a few weeks ago where what sounded like a woman's abusive ex-husband was suing her friends who had helped her have an abortion. So that one.
Oh, I missed that one. But I didn't it, so.
Yeah, it was I think they're now divorced. But it happened after Dobbs was leaked, but before Dobbs came out too. So there's that aspect to it as well. It's all a shit show. because we just, it's just really important to control women.
So Jamie, could you speak a bit about the Judge Dan Kelly and the very gracious loser in the election? I was covering the previous race where he defeated, and Charlie Sykes of the Bulwark was concerned because this was like, okay, well, the judge he defeated was someone who probably could have been much more competitive. I don't know if you agree with that, but
I was really afraid of Darrow, when the judge, the other Republican who lost in the primary. I was definitely a lot more afraid of her because she presents much more as a, fair, kind of your more normal candidate in a way that is more appealing to voters in a place like Wisconsin. Because, despite, the things that you hear from our crazy legislature, the fact is those people are in the legislature because of gerrymandering. Most Wisconsinites are not that extreme.
I'm from Wisconsin. Yeah.
And I do think that that judge had a better chance of connecting with more Wisconsin voters. Especially with abortion, she is anti-choice, but with abortion being an issue, I think, giving her being a woman and also like, it's not just being a woman, but like Dan Kelly isn't just anti-choice. Like he is friends with the people who were like, oh yeah, there shouldn't be an exception for the life of the mother. Like that is Dan Kelly. Like just not even pretending to,
People who are anti-abortion, usually, like occasionally they will draw the line at, I would rather not die. Like personally, for me, I would like the choice to die on whether to die or not. But
super pro-life to say that you can't terminate a pregnancy to save the life of the mother, super pro-life.
There is a reason behind that, and it's actually super fucked. It's because the baby isn't baptized yet. Like the theory, and I've heard this from, it's probably more like the religious perspective, but like the theory is that the mother has already had a chance to be saved by Jesus and accept Jesus as her personal savior. The baby has not. And I don't know, like, I think does everyone have limbo? I don't know. I only know Catholic stuff.
No, Protestants don't. At least the Protestants I know of, we don't do. Well, I'm not one anymore, but no, we never did that.
Yeah. I know wherever you guys send your unbaptized babies, they didn't want them going there. So that is a very big part of it because, they basically like, you are here on earth to accept Jesus Christ as your personal savior. If you've already done that, you can go. Like you're all set here.
Also, like, I feel like, it's kind of lost in all of this that, like, if the pregnant person dies, like, the fetus is probably going to die too, unless it's like, very late.
They don't have a grand scope of medical issues at play here. Something that occurred after this election that was talked about a lot was that from some of the Never Trumpers was, Democrats could have defeated Ron Johnson, but they put up that crazy, wild-eyed, socialist, loving, defund the police, Mandela Barnes, who is not like Wisconsin's Knights, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. How true do you think that is, Jamie? I mean, obviously, Evers did win. Was this a case of a white candidate could have won? I've always been kind of like, look, it's all about, I just want to have my rights. So if it's about the white liberal versus the black liberal in a racist scenario, I'm going to go with whoever's going to win. Sorry. And that'll be the case in 2024 or 2028 for me as well. Or do you think that Barnes just did not run a particularly very good campaign and allowed himself to get framed a certain way?
I think that both were aspects in it, because like you said, Evers won re-election, and it was close. I think that I do think that Mandela Barnes could have won. I was not incredibly impressed with the outreach that he was doing, particularly in the city of Milwaukee. I think that that Mandela's campaign was very, very focused on trying to win over, the white suburban soccer moms. And so even in his outreach, like within the city of Milwaukee, it seemed like he wasn't really trying to reach, the minority communities here in the city. And we had low turnout here in Milwaukee comparatively. So but also, yeah, a lot of people probably did vote for that fuckwad Ron Johnson because they're racist. I mean,
yeah.
Racists still get to vote, so you don't. But on a more positive spin, because that sort of I was surprised by this outcome, and it was a testament. We'll get to that. In Chicago, sort of while the Never Trumpers were kind of talking about the Mandela Barnes, now any appearance of, if you don't French kiss a cop on live television, you're going to lose. Then they kind of write in while they're talking, and what happened in Chicago, Brandon Johnson had won, which I was surprised by.
I was like, hey, my entire neighborhood.
Don't Peggy Noonan us, Robin.
No, I know. All I saw the whole time, like for the whole election, I saw literally one person in Chicago with a Paul Vallis pin, and people were kind of giving him dirty looks. Like, I know that there were people, but like my neighborhood actually ended up going 70% for Johnson. So my assessment was not
my old neighborhood. They're still good. Good to hear.
Yeah, Ukrainian Village is like, it's a good spot. Like, I think like Ukrainian Village, Humboldt Park, and Logan Square, all 70%, which was a really interesting turnout there. Honestly, I think it's because we're sick to death of cops. Like, really, I think that is. Well, we've had so many seriously corrupt things happen with the police in Chicago, and we've had like literal black sites where people are being tortured. We had, Detective Reynaldo, the guy who was like framing everyone.
Bergie, I think is how you're supposed to say it. I always said Burge. The fun guy who was torturing black men into false confessions at his precinct into the 90s. Yeah, that was a good one.
I mean, there are so many examples of that. And then, like, just not too long ago, Lori Lightfoot gave away like I think, what was it, like 300 million of our COVID money?
Yeah, just like half.
Like, have a big party, guys. I don't like, what was that even?
Like half of Chicago's ARPA funds. It was insane.
Yeah. And it still wasn't enough. It's never enough. Not to derail this particular debate, but for other debates regarding trans policy or others, it's kind of this constant thing of, there's been stories about going back to the Clinton administration and the Obama administration where they will literally pass either overtly bad crime policy or overtly bad, tax policy and cutting domestic things, hoping to get these reasonable Republicans around or not get hit on these issues. And I think it was a Clinton administration staffer was like despondent of like, we did all this because he knew like, here's the people who's going to suffer because we cut out this social program or went this direction on crime, and it got us nothing. And that's repeated itself in the Obama administration. It's probably repeating itself in the Biden administration. Like you're never going to win with these people. But I mean, the cops hated Lori Lightfoot, just the most bare minimum trying of civilian oversight. They snubbed her.
Which is hilarious because like one of my biggest problems with Lori is that she loves the police too.
Literally, like she's a cop. Like that is also everyone else's issue with her.
But the point is, she was not perceived. They loathed her, and so the perception I had was like, oh, they're because the cops have the cool thing of like, teachers can't do this. Teachers can't just say, I don't like how I'm being treated. These kids aren't going to learn math, and the kids don't learn math. And it's like, oh, well, I guess we now need to
Yeah.
give teachers more money and stop saying mean things about them so that our kids aren't illiterate and know how to count. Instead, it's
Yeah.
like, no, these teachers suck. What's going on? But cops tend to have this ability to do
Or this
that.
idea that they're very fragile and could, they could break at any moment, the slightest insult, and they're going to be crushed.
So the perception of rising crime combined with what had happened to Lori Lightfoot, I thought, and some polls were showing that as well, that we're going to get the Vallis, the corporate funded cop lover. And it didn't happen. Again, I think part of what blew out the polls was that young people came out in droves. I do think abortion was an issue. He was perceived as not much of a Democrat, and you're nodding, Jamie, but
Well, because he
please.
literally said, like,
Yeah, like
more of a Republican than a Democrat.
Yep, and they all and it. I think it was the same video where he said, "I don't believe in abortion."
Yeah, I'm personally against abortion, and then he was like, "Wait, no, I'm personally for abortion. I think I don't know.
I'm having an abortion right now." No, like it's a breakdown of he's just breaking down during the press conference. This Key and Peele sketch of he's just constantly sweating. But that just does matter. It goes to speaks to that also, because the idea of like that dance conservative Democrats could do of like, I loathe abortion, but I'm going to protect the law used to be enough, and that was the law. Now we're kind of like, okay, are you going to stand up for abortion rights? Are you going to, veto certain laws or not things like things passed? Are you going to, at whatever level you're at, like governors, whatever, are you going to be in the trenches is what people are expecting now. So I think that was some of what we saw. That's great. Boston has a badass progressive mayor. Chicago has, this very young progressive mayor. And then there's my former city of New York, where I lived for a long time. With I was there with Giuliani and Bloomberg. So it's like, what's going on? Why we just don't? I mean, we don't have to try to put it in context. I mean, as having lived in New York, the idea of, let's say, AOC becoming mayor of New York is laughable. That would be laughable. There's no point I've lived in New York where that would be feasible. And you're getting kind of close to that in other major cities like Boston and Chicago. And even now in these sort of times, you get Eric Adams, who literally is slashing the library budget, which is a tremendous resource for poor people, for people finding jobs, for all sorts of things. Every reason that I am pro book. He was slashing that while giving cops like a 28% raise, literally on the backs of librarians, is just appalling. I was so like 28% and retroactive. Don't worry, we'll make it.
So, it's funny. Like I lived in Chicago for so long that like, okay, well, when Daley retired and we actually started having mayoral elections again, but like I'm always trying to explain to people like New York. I have a lot of New Yorker friends, and like I'm like, Chicago mayoral elections have never been like New York mayoral elections. Like Chicago is literally never ever ever going to elect a Republican with an R next to their name. It is never going to happen. Like Paul Vallis is as close as you're going to get. And I think that him not being a real Democrat is a big reason that he lost.
Yeah. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. New York is still perceived as this sort of very, very liberal place. And it's not. It is. I'm sorry for the digression here, but I've lived in New York for 15 years. I love it. It is rich people Mecca. It is. I was going to have a whole anti-friend screed with not anti-friend screed, but screed with my friend Claire Willett about this, of where shows like Friends and How I Met Your Mother, a lot of shows have sort of presented this idea for a whole generation of this is what you should expect from your big city, where it'll just be like your small town. Don't worry, you're gonna live in a village. That's cool, right? There's not gonna be queer people. There's gonna be all white people. You can leave your door open, and don't. Two ladies living in New York City can leave their door open for their neighbors to come in and grab stuff because it's cool. It's just gonna be Matt LeBlanc coming in rather than a serial killer. And this is what New York is. Here's what you should expect from New York. And the Friends New York, they come and that's not what they get. And they get pissed and they want, hey, Giuliani, take me away. I rode a subway, and instead of wacky characters, like I saw in that Subway episode of Friends, the one time you see him on a subway, but instead of wacky characters, it's like there's poor people. Yes, it's a city. It's like whatever. And what I want a crackdown, and that's just been sort of what New York is. I mean, obviously New York, huge financial center of the world and everything, but it is just very frustrating of how, because of course, Marcia Green arrives and rants about New York and says how dirty it is and all this sort of, which is expected. You get that. It was like she was doing a monologue from Taxi Driver. All the animals come out at night. What are you doing, Marjorie? It's like, oh, someday a real rain will come. It's like, Jesus, Marjorie. And but there's this retroactive idea that Donald Trump is not a native of New York and has not lived in New York. It's sort of my Batman thing of where, well, gee, Batman, before you put on your tights and go beat up poor people, is it somewhat of an indictment about your family that your town is a cesspool for generations? And I
also think the way that they see it is he was gracing them with his presence, and they were ungrateful.
His name is on buildings. That is
truly how they think about things.
His name is on. Well, I mean, you remember very early on when Ted Cruz, and this is one of those Schadenfreude moments, because he talked about, Trump and his New York values. And then when they're desperate to try to stop Trump, and it's like, okay, well, maybe we can stop Trump in where? The next primaries are in New York. It's the whole Acela corridor that Ted Cruz, the only man standing, insulted everyone. So I think Trump's going to do okay. And it was a slaughter. It was like, I hate this because of what happened later, of course, with Trump. But we all know watching Ted Cruz get humiliated was so wonderful. Like watching Marco Rubio lose his state, like having them call Florida the state he represents, like within a minute, was wonderful. But I mean, to your point, Robin, yes, they see him as different. He's kind of, but he's ultimately Staten Island kind of. He's their guy. He is so very New York, and he's very Florida because he's the part of Florida that gets everyone who gets fed up of how they view New York and everything. So, but yes, this is a roundabout way of saying New York's never going to have a very progressive mayor. It's just not possible. Even though as bad as Adams is, I don't know. Hopefully we can replace him with someone better, like a real Democrat. Who knows? But we hold out hope.
I mean, there are a lot of very rich people in New York. Honestly, like, we have rich people too, but our rich people are the Pritzkers. So, like, one of them's governor; he's doing okay. Those are our main rich people.
Yeah, I mean, their name is on everything. Like, their name is literally on my law school now. It's Northwestern Pritzker School of Law now. And it really is on everything in Chicago. And, like, just because of knowing, like, how rich they are, when JB first announced, I was very skeptical. And I've been pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. I was, like, absolutely not. Because, they're so rich and,
Well, I think New York is perhaps not unique, but it's an example of such an extreme sense of income inequality.
Oh, yeah.
So beyond, and let's not talk about the 1% or even the Park Avenue types. We're just talking about, you can have hedge fund men, you're making serious money, but they still live in a rat hole
Yeah.
for that, and everything is very expensive. And it's like, yeah, I know, I get it. And what happens is then they just sort of look, because they have to take the subway into work or whatever, and they look at it, their life of like, instead of thinking, well, if it's very hard for me to get by,
Yeah.
but what about the person who I just bought my bagel from, or who just delivered my Chinese food? How are they surviving? Instead, they're just like, oh,
Well,
how
because
dare
everybody
AOC talk
also
about,
had managers on the site. No, I'm like sitting there trying to
um,
afford their rent now. But
indeed. So this also leads into, bear with me here. So with Clarence Thomas, and there's issues here. Um, One of the things that came up regarding his being friends with billionaires and his whole kind of all these extravagant gifts he's taken. The one thing I want to kind of put in perspective for a lot of folks. So Supreme Court justices make $285,000 a year. You're not starving or whatever. But again, to put in perspective, um, he is a first year uh, associate at a decent law firm in DC, first year, right out of law school,
yeah.
averaged about $350,000 starting.
Oh,
And then
it's
of course
gotten
that
higher
goes
since
up.
I graduated law school.
Yeah. And
I'm old now.
by the time, so like say 10 years of your career, you make partner in these firms or whatever, you're making about $1 million. You're doing what you're going to start, especially in the bigger cities. One of the big problems for lawyers is that a lot of people go to law school, and New York and DC is our two cities. So you still, and it still costs the same. So it is like pretty tight for a lot of lawyers. But the thing with Thomas is they had a list of the people, net worth of the Supreme Court justices, excluding the most recent one, Jackson, and he was at the bottom of net worth, below Amy Coney Barrett, who is only a couple years older than I am. He's old enough to be her father, but she still has more, because of generational, I'm sure, things like generational wealth or whatever. I mean, Thomas, people talk about where Kavanaugh paid off his debts or how Kavanaugh, there's conspiracies around that, but Kavanaugh comes from money to a certain
Yeah.
degree. And Thomas's debt is a look. I could say, I'm sorry, I will say this. He's a broke ass black man. That was his background. Out of about a father raised by a very poor grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Then didn't work in private practice very long. At barely, I would even say, in Missouri. And then by 1981 was picked to sabotage the EEOC by Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
That's my editorializing, sorry, but
That's a good way to put it. I like that.
And so again, I always, because people will sort of lecture me about, well, they still make better than, yes, I get it. He's never starving, but you're not gonna get rich in kind of public, and a lot of
On
people
any government salary.
no, and that was his 40-year career. And even once he's been on the Supreme Court for 30 years, he was sort of, again, every year making, I would say, probably still less than first year, second year law firm associates. He was not making a lot of money. And so it is concerning, because it is not, it's one thing, let's say, if you are a Pritzker, all right, like, and that's your family, right? So it's like, oh, well, Jamie, who does all this pro bono, or Robin is just a journalist, but she was at this private island. It's like, well, I went to a family barbecue. Like, sorry.
Yeah.
I went to I'm associated with my family and my relatives or whatever. It's like, no. Clarence Thomas is a broke ass black man, and the only interest, I am sorry, billionaires have in you is to say, here's the stuff we want you to vote on. And I've said he's a cheap date, because there's no area. He's not even like, there were areas where Scalia, maybe on some aspects of free speech, in a stretch might go a certain direction, and same with obviously Roberts on ACA and even Dreamers. But Thomas is a complete right-wing hack. But look, and you might be able to speak to this, Jamie. I think there is certain benefits that he can do in sort of steering the court a certain way, choosing cases or what they're going to do. So it is concerning when he's like Harlan Crow, an actual name, is flying him off to, because again, his first year law associate salary, not bad. That is like, okay, you go to Europe, you're taking the Rick Steves trip, the tour. That's not bad. You're staying in some nice hotels. You and your wife had a nice dinner out. No, this is like private island stuff where you hunt poor people. That's what happens in these islands. We all know that. Like, there's like, it's always like people go missing and you'll wonder where they are. They're on this island and someone is explaining it to them. And it's just
what
like,
happened to all the QAnon mole children?
Oh, really? Wow. I can't believe I'm going to get hunted for sport. And then you just run. It's like, because what else are you going to do? As long as you've got breath in your body, but otherwise. So he's on one of these islands and like $1 billion, and he doesn't. I'm sorry. Oh, I was supposed to. He went with George Costanza. That was the news today. He went with the George Costanza. Was that wrong? Should I not have done that? Like, I'm sorry. I got to plead ignorance here. Because if someone had told me this when I was hired.
No idea. No. But no, that's literally what he's doing. He's like, I was just hanging out with my buddy. Like,
yes.
And meanwhile, like
Hitler's paintings for funsies.
Meanwhile, like a random government employee who, is an administrative assistant can't accept gifts of more than $25.
That administrative assistant just happens to meet a billionaire, and the billionaire is like, hey, let's go to our island and have some werewolf, because they also serve serve live werewolf.
Yes.
I also enjoy everyone's defense of Thomas. Like they really have been close friends for 25 years. Cool. He's been on the court for 30.
Yeah. You see that in. You scoop that in. Yes. That is the only interest. Yes, they groomed him. The guy who collects
Hitler paintings has in Clarence Thomas.
Since he got on once he's got on the court, he's made lots of rich and powerful friends, which is what we all should want for the Supreme Court.
And entirely coincidentally, just
Of course. Yeah, no. He's got a sparkling personality. He lights up a room with his smile, as they say.
And again, in fairness, if Kagan or Sotomayor or Jackson are on a private island with some I was like, okay, well, why? Yeah. I don't know why these billionaires have any interest in these people before then. So I'd be a little concerned. And
also, like, let's just imagine for a second the reaction if, for example, Justice Brown Jackson were vacationing with George Soros on his yacht on, these $500,000 trips. Like,
well, they'd lose their very minds.
There would be Democrats saying she should be impeached.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yes, there was the one Democrat who said, like, an anonymous Democratic said, "Oh man, well, can't really do anything with this because some faith in their institutions of the court is low already, and if we go after it, it'll blow." It's like, well, that's the point.
Yeah,
go after him. You do realize the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, is an anti-democratic institution that is clearly in the tank with the American right, and you do want to attack it.
Keep the institutions the way they are, even if they keep, failing.
Well,
It's
yes.
truly insane that like there are no real rules for Supreme Court justices. Like
Yeah.
every other judge in the country has all sorts of ethical rules that they have to follow, and for some reason we just decided that the unelected king judges at the most important court in the country.
Yeah.
They can handle it themselves, you know. We'll just let them do what they want. Whereas,
Yeah.
like in like Supreme Court justices, for example, like almost never accuse themselves. Whereas in lower courts, it's not even about like if you're arguing about whether a judge should recuse themselves in a lower court, it's not even about whether there actually is a conflict of interest. It's about whether one could be perceived.
Yes.
Because a lot of these rules are about making sure we have confidence in our judicial system.
Yes, so that you're not plotting a coup with your wife, or this whole idea of like, no, we never talk about. She never talks about how she's trying to overthrow the government by using her relationship with me to call the president. All that, we never talk about that at home, which I would believe her. I would probably not talk about what I do professionally with my wife, who we're on private islands eating unicorns, because that, like, who has time? Like, if is a level of wealth. I actually have respect for Clarence Thomas, because I could not, like, I would have gone insane. He's like, he still seems almost sane. I would actually be on the court, like, eating human flesh. Like, it doesn't matter. And what are you gonna do about it? I've got like the leg.
There are no rules.
What are you gonna do about it? You, who's coming for me? I'm on this court for life, baby.
And what's new? Ginny's newest thing, I think, in her own words, she's raising money to wage a war on the left.
Yeah,
a culture war. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like, she is so whiny. It's like, well, you won. Like, she feels powerless, even though she is only married to a humble Supreme Court justice. It was like sort of the whole, there's often these stereotypes about Black women have said of like sometimes that when white women date Black men, they get the best and the brightest. Obviously, I'm not an example of this. My wife clearly married for love.
Is Stephen complimenting himself there?
but it's just sort of, it's like, all right, I will marry this Black guy, but he's going to be a Supreme Court justice and completely advance our interests.
Is a loser. No.
But there was, I couldn't tell. It looked like a photo, and everyone corrected me that it was a painting. My vision is weird, and also I hate that type of art. Photo, like, it's just so tacky. But the painting is him. He doesn't look at it. How does he not look at that painting of himself, this lone Black man surrounded by some of the worst white men who ever lived? Amongst them Hitler portrait collectors, and not think, oh my God, what am I doing? And some sort of statue of a native indigenous person or something, and it's a weird.
There was a bunch of weird art involved in this story.
Yeah. Really, I think, okay, like, we should do some kind of retrospective of the terrible art that he has at some point. Because I think he's got like topiaries in the shape of Stalin or something. Or like I'm picturing a whole, like, I could be wrong. I'm picturing like the Edward Scissorhands thing, except it's all.
But what do you do? Like, if you're at this really swank place, the drinks are good, and you look up and there's the Hitler painting, it's like, I am so disappointed. I'm leaving at the end of this weekend.
Right after this mimosa.
Well, I can't leave tomorrow because traffic's gonna be a bear. But Monday,
and really, I should just wait for the private jet to take me back.
Yeah, like, I mean, by the time the jet's here, it's gotta go back. Then I'm gonna leave, and then but I am so disappointed by all of this. I do think it underscores another thing that Democrats should hammer, because Thomas has been big on this whole presenting himself as this. I like to go in the RVs, and I like to do the Walmart. I'm in the rural America with real people, and it's like because Republicans always go about painting the elite, especially Obama. And
right, just like everyman JD Vance.
When you talk about the elite, they're not talking about like actual rich people. They're talking about like us. Like,
yes,
I'm super elite. I got my crystal light. I got,
well, Ron DeSantis actually said that of where, oh well, when I say elite, I don't mean Clarence Thomas, even though he fit everything I described, and he's a literal Supreme Court justice and very powerful. But he's rejected liberalism. So you essentially, it's like, oh yeah, you can only be an elitist if you are a liberal, which does bring me. I do want to speak to this because some folks will. I've seen this in our comments for other stories or whatever that Thomas is. Please, white people, don't say that he wants to be white or that he hates himself because he's. Don't do that. Essentially, if you've seen Angels in America, there's the wonderful monologue from Roy Cohn, basically stating, "I do not want to be a victim. I want to be powerful." This is true of anyone. And I think that some people go of like, oh, she's an Aunt Lydia or he's an Uncle Tom or whatever. No, a common thread is I want to be powerful. I do not, you want me to be a victim. And I think some liberals need to understand it's like, no, but why aren't you siding with us, pathetic losers and whatever? It's like, okay, well, I want to be a winner on my private island. I want to hunt you for sport. You get why this is cool, right? For me, like I don't want to be the one hunting. There's going to be people. This is how the world works. You're either being hunted for sport or you're hunting for sport. And obviously there's a better option of those two. And he's always somebody who just wants to be part of the powerful. I never, as a Black person reading his stuff, I never got to that he hates Black people so much. He hates people who are marginal, who hates people who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And if you want to say he has any sort of racial animus towards anyone, it's actually towards white liberals. If you read a lot of his stuff, sometimes it's hard not to blame him. I mean, white liberals can be very annoying. Some of the most lecturing, mansplaining people can be on the white left, the sort of West Wing on steroids type stuff. And he got a lot of that. And I could get that. I get that if he grew up dirt poor, amongst other Black people who are dirt poor, if he was hanging around with other, maybe even working class white people, who often don't tend to be sort of so much condescending as just tell you call you the N word and get over, go on with it. But probably once, and I saw this when I moved to New York, you will experience a sort of a very kind of condescending, mistreatment from people who themselves think themselves as not racist.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I remember one of my first jobs was at a magazine, or obviously will not name it. It was in the mid-90s, and they were explaining a bunch of white guys of like how they wanted to do some of the worst people of the year, and the majority of them were Black. And it was always going to culminate with why Spike Lee was terrible or whatever, but they wanted to call him Spook Lee. And I was like, well, why is that funny? Like, I don't think that's very funny.
Wait, what? Oh my God, Jesus.
But that was sort of, and but that's the hipster, that type of hipster racism is just.
Oh yeah, that was a terrible.
And these are the same people who, I mean, that's the direct line to the Bill Maher. It's probably Bill Maher. It was Bill Maher. Yeah. I'm saying, but it's direct notice people who are like now this anti-wokeism or whatever, but they've always disliked, the worst people in the world are minorities and women, and we're the ones that, those are the ones that we don't like.
Yeah.
But that sort of, Thomas is a reflection of the sense of he has the power. No one has the power to remove him. He can do whatever he wants. The only way to leverage that is to make him embarrassing to other Republicans, though, or make him a liability. But that's impossible
as a people. So
well, yeah, they've been removed. They're shameless. But with Democrats, that works because you just push the leverage. So if it was Kagan, you'd have Manchin or Sinema or anyone would be on the floor of the Senate right now saying, "Oh, she must resign and she's hurt our noble institutions." And instead, I think Democrats are constantly surprised by this idea. They always think that Republicans will be shamed. And it was Doug Jones who was commenting on how will there be no Republicans who will step forward after what happened in Tennessee and do the right thing and say that, well, no, why would they? They just don't. But this won't advance. And I think it was another Scarborough, or not Scarborough, or Charlie Sykes was like, well, what they're doing, these Republicans, is not advancing their agenda. And it's like, well, their agenda is to be, I have power over you, and I am exerting that power. So I am expelling from Congress because you talked out of turn. I have the power to do it. I even have the power to spare. The baller was not the ones who, the true baller was the one who's like, I'm going to keep my friend on here. Because even though she's across, because even though she's a Democrat, she's still probably his friend, or they socialize more so than like, I'm going to keep my friend on here. And I don't care what you say. That's the true baller. Power play. What can happen of it? So you guys been watching this. What do you think of this tremendous, or as Biden said, unprecedented? And I was like, I don't think it's that unprecedented for those of us who studied Jim Crow history.
Not so much.
No, but it's still fucking insane. I mean, like, the fact that this is happening in 2023, and they managed to not only make it like one of the most anti-democratic things like I've ever seen in my lifetime, but also we're going to make it 100% clear that we're being racist with this too. The 6-year-old white woman will keep her around, but those 2 young black men gotta go.
It is all about the power play. Like there's, and I think what it reinforces, and it's tough for Democrats to admit that everything's about power. It's not about right or wrong. Our institutions are based on power. Who has the power to do it? Especially once you remove honor. So it's all gangster stuff. So clearly, there's a failing in the system when Marjorie Taylor Greene is even still in Congress, and she was not expelled in a healthy body. And people have said, well, the adults in the room take a civics course, Democrats who are, wonderful people, but those folks have always said, well, we just don't have enough willing. No. That's the problem, because in a healthy democracy, it's not just the infrastructure is what it is. It would be like, oh, the worst thing you could do is probably try to overthrow a free and fair election, and we're going to expel you immediately and get some other awful Republican in, and your gerrymander, you would lose nothing by getting rid of her. But that's not how it works. So I think it's been revealed for what it is. It's all power. And the only way to fight that is to exert similar power and be unafraid to do so. But if anything, these guys have been revealed to be some tremendous stars in the making. So
if nothing else, thanks, I guess, for putting these amazing young men in the national spotlight, because I think we're going to be seeing a lot more from them.
It's really exciting. Yeah, yay.
Well, thanks for joining. I know Robin has to catch the private jet to her island to
eat some people.
Yeah, and unicorn and live werewolf, which is so. Thank you all, and happy Easter, and for those who celebrate, happy Jesus Christ Superstar Day, 50th anniversary of one of my favorite movies. So
it's a good one. So one of the least bad Andrew Lloyd Webber joints. All right. See you guys
Thanks,
later.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Good to see you guys.